Senators have 1 week to hammer out a spending deal for the Department of Homeland Security. Right now, DHS is running on a stopgap funding measure as Democrats demand new reforms for immigration enforcement. Republican Senator Katie Britt, who's one of the lead negotiators here, says Democrats haven't responded yet to her outreach. In a statement Wednesday, she called Democratic proposals ridiculous. Then there's Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, who says Republicans have already shown they're unwilling to negotiate. He said yesterday nothing will get done until Republicans clarify what they're willing to support. It's not looking good. Joining us now, former battleground director for the Harris Walz campaign and former senior advisor to President Obama and Hillary Clinton, Dan Cannon. Also with us, Republican strategist and former George W. Bush White House official Ashley Davis. Pros one and all, kind of perfect for this conversation, which is very much happening on the Hill, but also very much about the midterm elections coming up. Ashley, I sort of feel like Republicans have every incentive to negotiate on this stuff because some of the reforms feel kind of obvious, like putting a standard of conduct in place for ICE at a moment where I think even administration officials agree, even if they're not saying it out loud, they're changing staffing on the ground in Minneapolis, pulling people out. I think it's clear there's been overreach or at least reason to reassess, right?
Yeah, and I think the issue that they agreed on the most, which has already been dealt with, were the body cameras.
Yeah.
So that was the number one issue. I think that Republicans are not going to move on the mask issue, as well as some of the judicial issues that they're trying to bring in. But here's the problem. I feel that this is going to be a CR that turns into another CR that turns into another CR. There's going to be a lot of political messaging. But at the end of the day, because DHS has ICE and CBP already funded through 2029, that you're really just talking about FEMA, TSA, and the Coast Guard. And I think that the American people will have a very low tolerance for both sides of the aisle but it's good messaging for Schumer and not as good for Republicans, to answer your question.
I think that's right. And again, this is where the politics and the policy, it would seem obvious that they should be in line, because I think even the polling shows the American public is saying, hang on a second, what's actually going on here? Shouldn't we put some guardrails in place? And then at the same time, politics always prevails in the sense that in a midterm year, it's really hard to get anything done in bipartisan fashion. And so for Schumer and Democrats, they've laid out this list of demands. If they get anything short of that and continue to fund DHS, what is the impact from the base?
Well, I think they should push as hard as they can, Ellie. But I think the point of what Republicans might do is interesting in this case, because Republicans have shown not just a willingness to touch the hot stove on politics, but just to lay and take a nap on the hot stove. I mean, look at health care, right? We're now 30 days into ACA premiums doubling. Every single day, Americans are paying $730 million more if you're on the exchange, and the rest of us paying 26% higher for health care premiums in an environment where cost is king. Yeah. They won't address that at all. I think on ICE, to your point, they've lost the politics. 60% in the Q poll think ICE has gone too far. 51% think the policies are making us less safe, to 35% saying more safe. It's incredible, because in many respects, immigration and this kind of deportation attack should be good politics for their base.
It has been.
Has been good politics, but they've lost the politics. But I just think the incentives, although it makes sense for the incentives to be there to have some sort of negotiation and deal making here, their base won't allow them to do that. In the midterm year, I think they're not going to cave. But Democrats should push hard and push for real reforms, and not just body cameras, which are, I think, low-hanging fruit, but real reforms at ICE.
I also think that you see Republicans, especially this week, more, and now the president, talking about the SAVE Act, which in theory, if you're just listening to sound bites, that you're thinking people should show IDs.
Correct.
If you're just, politics isn't your life. You see that Republican strategists are trying to bring that into the ICE or the DHS conversation, which is that's a very good issue for our base. Yes. And so I think you'll continue to see SAVE has to be added to whatever DHS bill, and then we just continue to have this fight. The Democrats aren't going to agree to SAVE.
Exactly. The goalposts move, but then also you're getting away from the central issue, which is that in some cases, ICE is operating without the basic standards that local police departments themselves have to operate within. And you've also heard Kristi Noem, when you talk about the body camera issue, say, okay, they're putting them on every officer in Minneapolis, but that there's going to have to be extended funding if you want to do it across the board, which I think, again, ICE does have its funding through the one big beautiful bill, as Trump often calls it. But the DHS issue, as I've kind of posed this to Democrats, they still say it's the fight they want to have. I also think for Republicans, when you listen to John Thune, who has sort of been somewhere in between the White House and where Democrats are, right? Often trying to find that middle ground on nationalizing elections, on immigration enforcement, saying that on nationalizing elections, as Trump talks about it, that it should be to the states. It feels like he's sort of the last person espousing typical conservative values in this Washington. Am I right?
Well, I'm sure Thune wakes up every day like, what am I defending? But on the nationalization issue, so I put this in the same tranche of I'm going to run for a third term.
Yeah,
we're not going to nationalize. I give it a -0 chance it's going to happen just because it's really a constitutional matter. And so is really 2/3 of the state going to ratify that? No. But we all know how this works, and we all fall for it every time, is where Trump will just throw something out there. So we're all talking about it this week. So what we're not talking about as much as some of the other issues that he's having to deal with. And this is the #1 issue. So I think this is like it's never going to happen, but it's a
I have
good...
a slightly different
I'm a
view.
big hold space for both, right? And I believe
Yeah.
the president when he says things.
Look, I think you have to take him literally in this
That's
case.
good. No, that's good.
But you have to.
No, you
right?
have
like,
to.
You
As-
have to.
He
You
may
have
not
to.
be able to do everything he's talking about, right? There's some guardrails that may hold here, but we
Yes.
know he will try, right? I mean, what happened on January 6th was a real effort. It didn't materialize, but they tried, and the trying is damaging enough in some cases.
I think that's right. And then also, whether or not I agree, you cannot do this. And I think there are guardrails and people in the Republican Party who are clearly saying that. And yet, yes, January 6th, but then also the way that DOJ is sort of muddying the waters on voter rolls, right? Throughout these blue states, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, others. Like, how are Democrats talking about and metabolizing this idea that there might be a groundwork laid for legal challenges to midterms that don't actually hold water, but are going to have to be reported on and talked about anyway?
Yeah, I think in 2020 there was discussion of this, but people didn't really take seriously the fact that this could happen on January 6th, that kind of an effort. This time around and last election, there was better preparation. I think on the legal side, there are lots of institutions prepared to go to court to fight where they have to fight. There are Republicans in states, at least, that will stand up for this and understand what the stakes are. But Congress, there's only a couple folks left in Congress on the Republican side who stood up to Trump after 2020 and January 6th. I think we look to them and say, what are you doing to adhere to the norms on elections and adhere to the idea that federalization or even intimidation, ICE agents even 100 feet from the polls, right, is a problem. And creating an environment where people are afraid to go vote is a problem.
Yeah, that is going to be a bit. Also, I think that you have a groundswell of governors on both sides that are starting to coalesce through the National Governors Association to make sure that they stick together in fighting. Going back to your original question of states' rights and like state control, or so I should say, it needs to stay there.
Which again, is just in the Constitution.
Exactly.
This is not like malleable politics. Dan Cannon and Ashley Davis, thank you both for coming on.